So we ready?
Yep,
Rob?
should be good to go.
Okay. So I want to call this meeting to order, and I apologize for my tardiness. But I think we've got through all the technicalities here now. Is there any declaration of interest of any sort? Seeing none, we'll proceed on. If one does come up, I'll ask you to declare it at that time. We're now looking at, are we looking at the terms of reference still in the Affordable Housing Work Plan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Item 3.
I will speak to this item.
I can barely hear you.
In our microphone.
That sounds better.
All right, is that better?
That's much, much better.
Okay, so I will speak to item number 3, which is reviewing the terms of reference mandate of the task force. The committee will recall that we've had 2 meetings of this group, our initial meeting in March, and then a subsequent meeting in July. During those 2 previous conversations, we've always talked about the mandate of this task force being to increase the supply of affordable housing. I want to ensure that there is a common understanding amongst everyone on the committee about the definition that we're using of affordable, because we've talked about affordable as well as attainable housing. Affordable housing is, as you know, very specific to assisting the most vulnerable in our communities, those who have a very limited or no income at all, and very limited access to housing that would fall within that 30% of their income. When we talk about attainable housing, and there has been suggestion of attainable housing being, as much as that segment of the population whose incomes, go up as much as $100,000. Those folks, many of whom are currently either priced out of the market to purchase right now, or they just can't find something to rent because our rental vacancy rates are so low. So I just wanted to confirm before we went too much further with the proceedings of the committee that we were clear about who we wanted to help. Is it both of those groups? Are we weighing more towards that definition of truly affordable housing that we want to be able to address some portion of that? I think one of the critical considerations is that the need in either of these cases far outstrips our ability to be able to address it. So we are going to have to make choices, and knowing based on what criteria we want to make those choices will be helpful to staff. And I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
So I invite comments. What are our thoughts? It seemed to me a year ago when we were talking about housing, we were really talking about both. Remember the session that we had in Hanover? We were talking about, for example, in the town of the Blue Mountains, if we're talking housing, we're probably talking more attainable than we are affordable. If we're talking in maybe Owen Sound or Hanover, we're probably looking at maybe a mix of both, but definitely on the affordable side of things. Any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor Swever.
Yes, I agree, and I think both there are needs in a broad spectrum of needs, and I think that's why we need to define clearly what we're doing. Certainly there's a huge need for affordable housing, and for the people that are most in need, and then there's a need for the attainable housing. And we'll be looking at statistics later in this meeting on what are market rents. And you can see that market rents, well, those are old numbers, but I've looked up some new numbers here for October 19. And certainly, in some municipalities, we don't have data for everywhere, but it's pushing $1,000 a month now. So that means that you're looking at a different demographic than those that are most in need. Now, although we'd like to look after everyone, we also have to decide what is the appetite at County Council for paying for this. In that certainly attainable housing, by giving some small concessions and managing it properly, can be self-sustaining over time. It'll need a capital infusion at the beginning in the form of a loan, but the rents will cover a large part of the cost. Whereas on the affordable side, it will need a continuous subsidy. So I think in defining what our mandate is, we need to go back to County Council and say, what percentage of the tax base are you willing to devote to this? Because there's no sense us coming up with a great plan for affordable housing and then County Council and saying we need $5 million a year. And they say, well, that's not going to happen, folks. And, then we've spent, maybe a year and a half, 2 years coming up with a great plan that doesn't get support. So I think early on in the process, and I see we do have that for first quarter of 2021 in the work plan, is, actually going and finding out what is doable at the County Council level in terms of funding. And that will kind of tell us how many people we can serve and what demographic we can serve, because it's quite different, the amount of subsidy needed for affordable versus attainable.
Right, and I see, Kim, you've got your hand up, but before I go to you, I go back to the terms of reference. And the terms of reference really speaks to affordable and does not really address the fact that we might want to look at attainable. Or is it the wish of this body that we are really here to address affordable? Kim?
I think I wanted to raise the point. Looking at the costs, I guess it depends how broad a net you want to cast. If there's not affordable housing, if you have a segment of the population that is not housed, that is living rough, that is looking for shelter beds and things like that, which we don't have a surplus of here, you're going to run into all of those enforcement costs, the mental health and addiction challenges that come along with that. And I think there's been a great body of research, and Anne Marie can speak to this better than I can, about the principle of housing first. And if people don't have a safe place a secure place to call home, you're going to have a host of other issues, and you'll spend a lot of money addressing those issues.
Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Councillor Suever's point, I'm not in the least bit worried about council having the appetite. Like, we have already sent, I can't remember the number, more than $1 million to Town of Blue Mountain, specifically for affordable housing. The council has already committed to that. I don't think there's anyone on council that didn't campaign on affordable housing. I think this is going to be a no-brainer regardless of what we do in terms of having the appetite to spend.
And what say you, Councillor O'Leary, with respect to attainable housing?
Well, my first thought is to look after affordable housing first. I mean, that's the most vulnerable, and if we can't do both, that's how I would lean.
Okay. Warden McQueen, did you have your hand up? I think.
Yeah,
No?
I can. Yeah, no, I can make a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the clarity. I know a while back affordable, and then some people started calling it attainable because it wasn't quite the. I don't know if the word derogatory, but it was more when somebody was going to say affordable, then they sort of looked at what was sort of attached to it, and then it sort of got switched to attainable, which in my mind was sort of similar, but I guess obviously a little different. but I know for a lot of, I guess in more of my circles of where I govern and as far as mayor goes, I've been, different people have approached me as how the heck does young people ever afford to live here just because of the high cost of real estate, and how can they raise a family here and all those points. And so that's sort of what's been, pulling on my shirt tails, with no disrespect for the whole part about the other parts of the county. And that's just because of probably where I govern as far as a mayor and that type of thing, as far as on that side. But in the sense of Grey County, obviously, from the amount of information that's been provided by Anne Marie, and certainly some of those stats that were provided at our meeting last week, was really an eye opener. And, I think that, it's, I guess we have to take little bits and attack it. And then maybe we got to come back to attainable at another time, in the sense that that's where we need to go. And just, and I think that also maybe in the planning, and I know that's the big, we've always been talking about through our planning documents, is trying to incentivize or trying to create opportunities through our development to create those opportunities for rentals, or, for those first time, members of our society that are trying to, start off with a family and that type of thing. And maybe that's, as Councillor Leary says, maybe we have to fix one before we can fix the other, and sort of move forward. But I understand that, probably more so with the mayor of Blue Mountains and maybe part of Grey Highlands, where the high price of real estate has gone through the roof, it has really had a big effect on young people and trying to attain that first home, or even try to find a rental. It's been really tough in that sort of a region. So we may, just have that little bit more of what we sort of are hearing out there for sure. I just have a further question to you, Mr. Chair. And I was on a call on Friday, and Huron County has a task force on homelessness, and obviously if you can't attain or you can't afford a house, where do you end up? And I sort of, I don't know, somewhere I would like to have a little conversation on where are we with Grey County on that, because obviously, that's our most vulnerable sector, in the sense of, if you can't even find a home, or you can't, what do you do then? And so it sort of put a little bug in my ear. Is, it's funny that Huron County has had a task force on homelessness. What are we doing with those people, and how is that, do we, obviously that's probably more of a sector in the urban settings and that type of thing. And, it's, but I also see from some of the correspondence, Mr. Chair, along with the town of Collingwood and others, where they're also taking on the issues of affordable housing. So obviously they're looking at it as well, and there's some suggestion of maybe we work with them as well as what they're doing. I know they've committed money toward affordable housing and trying to, I don't know if others have had a chance to read those correspondence that's on our agenda, but I thought it's not just unique for Grey County, but it's certainly unique around us as well. And but thank you very much for that definition of between affordable and attainable. And I'm certainly, I can see where we, maybe we got to start at one and then work at other areas as well and come up with a plan. But it's going to be something that we do need to be working forward for sure.
So, Mr. Warden, I know that when Anne Marie speaks, she will address the homelessness piece, because I think it's maybe a little bit different in Grey County than say in some other bigger areas where you actually find people who are on a sidewalk and you say, oh, that's a homeless person. But I'll leave it for her to address that, if you don't mind, when she speaks.
Sure.
Councillor Burley, did you have anything to add here?
Yes, I did. Thanks, Mr. Warden and committee. I tend to agree with Councillor O'Leary. These are two very big topics. And I really think that the county would have better strides ahead if we look towards affordable housing. It's something that we can easily get our hands into and actually do something. And I realize that affordable housing is a big issue too, but maybe if we get to solve the affordable housing issue in our Grey County, maybe we can work towards the province to help us with the affordable part by putting different guidelines in place. It's just my thoughts. I really feel that we should tackle the one item first, and that's affordable housing.
Right. So given what I'm hearing, sort of, there seems to be a consensus coming forward. And if we take a look at our terms of reference, I would really say that it really does speak to what everybody seems to be talking about, which is affordable housing as to attainable housing. Would I be correct in that? Just nods if I can see those. I think there's a consensus that we're really looking as a task force on addressing affordable versus attainable housing.
Mr. Chair, I do see that Anne Marie has her hand up. She
Oh,
can
okay,
Provide some more context for you.
thank you. She's probably just bursting at the seams to speak, right? Anne Marie, go
Just a
right
little.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just wanted to, I guess, echo what all of you are saying is I think that the county does need to look after our most vulnerable people first of all. And of course, there's probably going to be opportunity when we are looking at building affordable housing that if we do want to make it something that is sustainable, that we would have attainable mixed in with it. But the focus probably should be looking at those people, the seniors that maybe that are insecure with their housing, people that are on the streets, or people that are couch surfing, providing homes. And we do have a homelessness response table in which we work with the hospital, Canadian Mental Health Association, both counties, and any of our housing related social agencies. So we may not have a task force per se that is like an action group like this, but we do have a strategy in place with all of those key players. And so that's moving forward, and starting October 1st, the homelessness response table will be looking at moving forward with providing services to people that are experiencing chronic homelessness in our area.
Okay, so back to you now, Kim, because we were talking under item number 3 about our terms of reference. And I think we've got now some clarity around it's affordable, and we wanted to talk about the work plan.
Just a comment, Mr. Chair, before you move on. Just a comment from the warden.
Go right ahead.
So just a point of clarity then. So the part of affordable is what people on that vulnerable sector can afford. But does that vary throughout the county as well? Because if you're looking at rental rates, and I saw like the old Odawa has, I was reading through there, and they have sort of a fixed rent rate for a single bedroom or a 2-bedroom in that. Does that, and maybe this is a question to Emery, does that vary throughout the county because of or does that stay sort of in a regional, from a provincial standpoint of what that number is? And if it does vary through region, it would be good, like sort of like the stats we had on Friday, is to have a bit of an idea of what's the upside and high side of that, because we know certain areas are, just in the sense of even finding rental or what that, and just how does that develop that rental rate? And I'm thinking about Odawa is how I was reading that report.
So, Mr. Warden, we had the answer to that come up in the Owen Sound Hanover task force. So I know Anne Marie will definitely have the answer. Go ahead.
Certainly, thank you. Yes, so it is actually based on the person's income. So it is
Right.
30% of their income. So that's where our rent is for RGI. For affordable, what happens is it is 80% of market rent as put out there by CMHA or CMHC. So Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation sets the rate, and that would be for Grey County. So Toronto would have something different than here. But what it does look at, it also looks at, it's based on a number of factors in the community and in the area, but it's essentially looking at housing for people that make under $30,000 to $33,000 a year. So it's really focused in on that being affordable for that group. When it comes to income, it doesn't necessarily look at local market.
That helps.
Oh,
Brian,
just
you
to follow
trying to send me a message? Or I could read the back of your notes, Brian. Sorry, Mr. Warden, did
Sorry
you have?
about that.
So just to follow up to that, so I remember the 30%, but now the 80%. So just in a nutshell, if you don't have enough rentals, that's a problem. And so certainly having more rentals available does help. If you have if you meet the criteria, but if you have no place to go, that still comes from a shortage of spaces, I guess. Is that correct to say? And so we have to find that right balance, Anne Marie?
It's correct to say that we lack rental housing. We don't have enough of it, and we don't have enough that is in have lower rents. So we need either subsidies to help out with some people so they can stay where they are, but we also need to build. So we need both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we back to you, Kim? You're muted. No, you're still muted. There you go.
Thank you, Rob. I think Anne Marie will speak to the work plan.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. A lot of that going around. Yeah, so with the work plan, just moving forward, we are looking at meeting with the local planners and at a meeting coming up in October. And at that, we'll have a good opportunity then to speak to all of the municipalities and get an idea of what their sense is for the need for affordable housing. And we'll also work with them next step looking at land. I'm not sure, Randy, if you're got this on the agenda again, but having a look at what land might be available for us to get a land bank put together. We know that with incentives and with land, that we can work with private developers, with nonprofits, and look at some strategies to build affordable housing and make it as sustainable as possible. So that's sort of moving forward where we're at right now with the work plan, and continue to move on. The other one that we're looking at is a rent subsidy, and I'm going to have a report coming to council. There are some people on our wait list, probably we're estimating about 25%, that probably are okay where they are. So their housing might be appropriate for them, but they just cannot afford it. So is there a way that we can provide a rent subsidy to the landlord on a monthly basis in order for them to maintain that housing? So we're looking at some of those different strategies. So that's sort of where I'm at on the work plan as of now.
Councilors, any comments about the work plan?
Question, Mr. Chair. So when you're building, Anne Marie, maybe similar to what the Blue Mountains with their attainable, they have three phases, not phases, but three. One's smaller, one's medium, and one's bigger. So for when you're doing affordable rentals, probably more units per space probably gives a little bit more of cost effective for the developer building. Is there sort of an ideal size? Like if you are like, so if you're building a unit that has 10 versus the same footprint that's building 25 versus the same footprint that builds 100, obviously you're going to have economies of scale. Is there a certain like ideal to incentivize, I guess, the developer in the sense, so that if we find land, then they sort of have to have enough land to be able to, I guess it's a density. I guess the word I'm looking at is density, to make it more cost effective for a person or a company to build. Is that fair enough to say?
Yes, so definitely if you've got more units, then you can put in a mix of units too. So you could maybe have, a number of
Offset.
affordable units and
Yes.
then some market units to offset that. And it'll be different for each. I mean, we've done a build with the Trembles and, 11 and 4 worked for them. We've got the Ottawa Heights, in which it's 43 out of the 60 units are going to be affordable and the remaining would be market. So it really is probably unique to that build, but it's something that you can crunch the numbers and see what that's going to look like. And the more money you can take off from at the onset, so for instance, not having land costs, not having development charges, that can be put back into making it more affordable.
Right.
And sometimes there is other funds that are needed also. So yes, it's an individual, but that's what you would do. You would look at what are your costs overall and how can we make this work?
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Randy.
If I might, Mr. Chair, further to that, yeah, Emery's exactly right. If the more units we can put on a site, and that's where it's important to look at from a policy and a zoning perspective, making sure that in our communities that are fully serviced, that we're able to increase that density, because you get more bang obviously for your buck if you can put more units on and achieve also the overall goal. What I think that council is wanting to achieve is providing more rental units out on the landscape. So I think looking at that from a policy and zoning perspective will be critical. And I know that a number of municipalities are already doing that and looking at, reducing minimum unit sizes and things like that, and removing that from zoning bylaws so that it gets rid of those restrictions, so we can look at how many more units then can we fit into a parcel of land. And Anne-Marie said it depends. It'll depend on each build and the makeup of the actual parcel itself. But if we can do it on the policy and zoning side to make sure that those aren't being the restrictions for a higher density build, then that's maybe where we should be looking to turning our attention to anyways.
Okay. Anything else on the work plan? We all happy there? Madam Clerk, do we need to do anything formal with respect to the terms of reference? We've kind of confirmed that that's what we want, and we have some clarity there.
That's correct. And the task force actually adopted the terms of reference at the last meeting. So this was just more for clarification.
Beautiful. Okay. So we're on to item number 4 now then, the South Georgian Bay Tourism Workforce Attainable Housing Strategy. That's quite a mouthful. And that's Savannah, are you taking us through that?
Yes, I will start with that, and then Randy's going to help tag team. We just really wanted to make sure that this task force was aware of the work that was done with the South Georgian Bay Tourism Labor Supply Task Force. This was a report that came out in 2018. You can see Greg very involved in it, as were all of our neighbors from around the region. And what it was looking at was specifically that attainable housing side, and looking at the unemployment and the difficulty that our region was having in trying to find those entry-level positions, and what type of housing were we going to need to be able to sustain that. So this report actually has a lot of really good information and some case studies that shows the different types of development that are possible and what it looks like when you do put those incentives on. So later on in this agenda, when we talk about number 6, we've given you a couple of scenarios of what it looks like when you start to stack those incentives and actually create that business case for the developer for the attainable housing side. So it very much looked at that public-private partnership and what through our policies we can do to incent the private sector to develop this kind of housing. But we just weren't sure if everyone on this task force was aware of it. So we wanted to make sure you had it, because it was a really good document, and we used this when we were putting together the CIP and all of the policies. And I know, Randy, I'm sure you can speak more to how you've used it for DCs and other policy or unofficial plan.
Yeah, further to Savannah, as Savannah indicated, this is a really good document, and really looked at a certain segment more on the attainable side, but we also have used it to come up with incentives, or the recommended incentives that council is now either supported or is in process. Things like development charge exemptions and development charge deferrals. And looking at planning and development fee waivers, deferral of property taxes to occupancy, which is something that can be explored as part of your community improvement plans, and a number of other incentives. One that's an interesting one that we haven't explored in further detail, but was an interesting recommendation, was rental guarantees. So this is where you're working with employers to, on a partnership basis, to guarantee that they will rent so many units with any particular build. It just helps to relieve some of the pressure, I guess, the risk that developers take when they're building these rental units. If they can see that so many units are going to be rented over a period of time, and at the same time, the employers are then guaranteed that so many units are available to house some of their employees. It's a win-win situation there, and so this is something that we want to definitely explore further as part of our economic development work, and as part of our work with our working groups and others. So, but yeah, some of the incentives definitely we've borrowed, so to speak, from this study. to move forward with looking at how we can encourage more rental builds throughout Grey County.
Comments, anyone? Councillor O'Leary?
Mr. Chair, just a question for Kim. Have we ruled out eliminating the developer and just having our own?
I don't think that really eliminated anything at this point. We don't really have you know, a whole construction company at our disposal. So parts of it, of course, would need to.
No, I realize that. I'm just
tendered,
thinking, if
Yeah.
we, you know, I'm looking a little bit ahead there to, I think it's
Yeah.
numbers. Or we
Yeah,
have-
no,
you
I
can-
think similar to some of the other development projects that we've got on the books, what would it be like for us to have a pretty clear idea of exactly what we wanted done and put it out there on the street and see what we got back as far as interest and timelines and what they think it was going to cost.
Okay, because I just wonder, like, if we hired or if we were giving incentives, where there's a lot of talk about incentives in just about
Mhm.
every item in this agenda. If we gave ourselves these incentives and had our own building and just took on the entire project and called it the Grey County Affordable Housing Complex or whatever, and I don't know what the numbers would look like. I'm just asking.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Anne Marie, are you familiar with any of your CMSM colleagues who have done those builds? I'm more familiar with the model where they're working with the nonprofit as we are with Owen Sound Housing.
Yes, I'm familiar. Simcoe County has done some of their own builds. But usually it's a mix between the nonprofit. What is happening now that mortgages are finally ending on a lot of the buildings and whatnot, they are looking at opportunities. If we have a smaller building and you have a larger lot, then often they will increase their own. So they'll do their own build on land that's already owned. Unfortunately for us, we don't have a lot of that. But one of the things that is in the work plan is to look at some of those opportunities. For instance, if we have a 2-story and maybe we want to make it a 3 or a 4-story, like there are options. But definitely Simcoe County has done some of their own developments.
And Councillor Burley is going to build them all for us. No. Other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Laura can go ahead.
Yeah, so what the Blue Mountain Sustainable Housing Corporation is doing is somewhat similar to what Councillor Leary is suggesting. It's not a good idea to do it in the corporate structure of the county, because all governments are inefficient. So what we have is the Attainable Housing Corporation, much like the Whistler model, where it's a design build and turned over to. So we are hiring a builder to build it for us. We're not running a construction company because that's not our expertise. And so there may be an opportunity, and as things evolve, to partner with a developer, especially if you're going to allow a mixed use, because obviously they want to fast track the planning process. They like the exemptions. So if they build a portion that is market, that makes it attractive for them. And then maybe you turn over some of the units to a housing corporation that does manage them for the county. That's really the way we're looking at it from the Attainable Housing Corporation. You could do the same with affordable. You just have to recognize with the affordable that you're going to be providing ongoing subsidies for this. But the model works. It's, you just have to have that structure so that you do. I think it's important that you do end up owning it, though. You don't want to leave the buildings in the hands of developers, because then it becomes very difficult to control the rents, because obviously they are in it for a profit. And so to have it run by a not-for-profit housing corporation, either one of the existing ones on a managed basis, but it is important to own it, because then you are building up equity, and then you have a means of doing additional projects, because the corporation actually has assets, as opposed to if you're just a management firm, then it's every time you want to do a project, you've got to come back to the well because you have no ability to borrow money. And right now, and the way the world is going, I don't see interest rates going up. So there's a lot of money available, particularly for municipal corporations, because they're seen as a fairly safe investment. So that's all.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry. I muted myself. So what I'm hearing is a bit of a debate between two philosophies. One where we are offering incentives to existing developers, and another one where we're sort of saying, here's what we want, and we are essentially putting out for bid, but it's more controlled by us. Councillor Soever, I hear you saying that it's difficult if it's in the hands of the developer to control rents, but we could also possibly control rents by contract. If we had it developed that way.
That's true. The thing is that in that manner, there are no assets in the county, and therefore you're always at the mercy of the developer. I mean, it's gonna be, if they own the asset, are we going to tell them that they can't sell it? In which case it will be like us owning it. And I doubt that you'd get much interest, because most rental companies, there's two components. There's the operating income, which is modest, but then there's a real upside on the real estate speculation. In terms of, if you would have built, say, an apartment building or development here in the town of Blue Mountains or anywhere 30 years ago, that land now, it's being ready to be redeveloped, but it's worth a huge amount of money. So just owning the asset is what the developer wants, but he's also got to have an exit strategy. So, and you end up as the county just putting more and more money in. Whereas if you have the Whistler model has become sustainable for Whistler, and that their rents and, they have assets. So if they need more buildings, they can borrow against their existing asset pool and go to the, conventional banks and borrow money and build new buildings and grow that way. Whereas you don't have that unless you're going back to the county again and the taxpayer if you are, not the owner.
So Councillor Soever, I hear you leaning towards the side of, you would want us to own it. You would want us to have what it is that we want and then put it out for bid. And
Yes.
somebody else would build it and we would then own it.
Yes.
I hear you. Any other thoughts? Councillor Burley?
I really like that idea. I really feel that the corporation the size of Grey County, it'd be really important if we were to hire a management company to look after our interest. They would be the contractor, we'd be the managers. We'd tell them what we want them to build at X number of costs. We have all full control over everything and give them a certain percentage for doing that for us. And I really think if we put something like that out to the general public out there, you're going to get a lot of developers that would jump on that and want to come back. And that would, if I had full control, that's the way I would go in a heartbeat.
Okay, Councillor McQueen, or Warden McQueen, sorry.
That's okay. I like the idea of building on your asset. So if you own it and then you build on that, then you can borrow against that to, it's like going through life. You build on your equity and it's whether it's an arm's length corporation or however you set it up. But I think there is the issue around private ownership where it becomes profit driven versus providing that service to the public. So you certainly have to find that balance, but certainly if the model's out there, it's something I would definitely think it's worth looking at. And certainly by owning an asset and investing in an asset, it's still your asset. So I guess at a certain time, if the county decided it didn't want to be in that business, I guess it could always sell that asset too, right? So, but I think it's by controlling that, it certainly gives you the ability to, I think as our terms are referenced, what's our mandate here is to be able to provide affordable housing. Well, if you can, drive down the cost and keep that, other than the managing side, if you get somebody, who can, or whether it's an arm's length corporation or whatever, you got to be careful on the cost of continuing to look after that. But yeah, I'm sure others are doing it. We just need to look at how it's being done, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mr. Warden. I'm looking more to Anne Marie and Randy and Savannah and I guess Kim. These answers must be out there. There are people who would probably be able to readily tell us, here's the the advantages and disadvantages of this debate that we're having.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Randy.
There's definitely models out there. There's
Mm-hmm.
cons to, I think, both models, so to speak. I know, the county themselves have done both, right? The Durham builds in Durham was partnering with a private developer, offering up land and other incentives in order to make those units happen, entering into an agreement with that developer, though, over a 20-year period to make sure that those rents are guaranteed. So that's one option, one model. And then the other model that Councilor Swever is indicating, where the Blue Mountains is looking at, is you're partnering with a developer to build it. But in this case, the Blue Mountains Attainable Housing Corporation owns that asset at the end of the day. You partner with them to, someone to manage that asset for you, because there's obviously costs associated with managing those units going forward. And then depending on, where that goes, then the pros are to that you do have that asset. And if it's gaining value and equity over time, then you can reinvest that to fund a future build. So there's multiple, I guess, options and models out there. Both, I think, you can assess them, both have disadvantages and advantages. It's something that if this Attainable Housing Task Force wants us to look at further, we're happy to take a look at that and just explore even the models that are happening here in Grey County, as well as elsewhere, like Councilor Swever indicated, the Whistler model. So those are some further information that we can bring back to this task force to, in the end, and maybe it's a mixture of both, going forward. Maybe it's a mixture of, we're providing incentives for private developers, but at the same time, we're also looking for a land where affordable builds that can be built through either existing housing corporations or the Grey County Housing Corporation. So there's multiple options. I don't know if Anne Marie or Kim, if you have any further thoughts, but there's definitely a multitude of options to try to achieve having more affordable housing units built within our area.
Yeah, and for us,
Go ahead. That was Anne Marie, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Go ahead, Anne Marie.
I think you're muted again, Anne Marie.
hi there, I'm back on.
Here.
I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of nowhere right now, but I just wanted to say that we do have a corporation. So all of the housing that we already own, all of our Grey County housing is actually through the Grey County Owen Sound Housing Corporation. So we already have that corporation. We already have the management of it too, because that's what we do. But there are different models. Certainly, if you look at Ottawa Heights, Owen Sound Housing Company, this is their fifth build in so many years, and that's what they do. So they've got enough assets now that they can borrow against when they can continue to do builds. So it's certainly a model that works with nonprofits, and it's certainly a model that the county could look at doing themselves. I agree with everything you're saying. There's definitely a benefit of keeping it in-house versus out with developers. And I think that even if you look at the province and their the way that they're doing things now, they are reaching out to those nonprofits, and the money that's out there is for nonprofits only, like the COCHI and the OFI funds. So I guess there is that recognition at a province level too, that that's probably where that housing is going to remain at a low rent, is when you're dealing with nonprofits and counties or municipalities, that sort of idea, rather than the developer. We're lucky. We do have that 20-year agreement with the Trembles. And I also would like to say too that even after that 20 years, the apartments we build are very, very modest. So they are going to stay at some sort of affordable, attainable rent. They wouldn't be able to get a market rent probably for that because of the size.
So I'm hearing members of the force saying they have a preference for increasing our stock. Am I seeing nods of the head on that? No.
I think if I could, Mr. Chair, I think that's a great idea. But, once you make that decision, you still have 9 municipalities. Where are we going to build this? How many are we going to build? And, if we put one in Owen Sound and one in Meaford, what are we doing for Blue Mountains and what are we doing for Grey Highlands in terms of financial help, or how we're going to move that along? Because I think we all have our own stories in terms of affordable housing.
Kim?
I think the point that was raised earlier by Randy and Anne Marie, we recognize that each of our member municipalities has their own needs, as well as either greater or lesser assets available to put towards something like this. So at a staff level, we intended to work with the planning staff and others in each municipality to have an understanding of what the most current conversations are that have happened at their council table, and what property or anything else they might have available, what they believed their communities most receptive to having.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to go to Warden McQueen, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Soever.
Certainly good points and that's been raised here. And I had one other thought. If it was Grey County Arms Length Corporation that was doing it, is there an opportunity for requests, in a sense that naming rights? So if there's people that have money that are passing on and they want to put money towards something that's sort of like a naming right, sort of like, so say there was I'm going to say the black family or the white family or whatever that wanted to put something towards something, so they would have the naming rights. That's all. Just, the building would be called the White Family Building or whatever. And is that a possibility? Because, they say there's a tremendous amount of wealth that's going to turn hands, and there's also the opportunity that people always want to feel that they've done something maybe in their lifetime towards something, or give back. And giving back to, affordable housing units that helps people is giving back. I don't know if that's an opportunity, but I just throw it out there, Mr. Chair, and it's just another possibility of, and I don't know, obviously, again, it's probably been done somewhere else. And I just think that we want to keep all options on the floor, and as far as what there's my clock, Councilor O'Leary is saying, is he brings a good point, but certainly when it comes to, and maybe you can clarify that, is if there's areas of heavier or more need, those people are probably going to be wherever the facilities are to a certain degree. And I don't have that answer, but I would think that wherever it's built, there's probably need everywhere. And there's probably more of a need. I know there's probably more of a tendency to, and that's why we're going through the Owen Sound Hanover Task Force as well. And some of those stats that popped up on Friday sort of identify some of that maybe as well. But certainly, I think our mandate is trying to start to address the need, and certainly we'll work through those details. And I think if land and certain circumstances that come about, we're going to have to work through that. But I think we have to look at all ideas and options on the table to move forward. And I think I think there's a lot out there, and I think somebody else has written that rule book that we just need to look at where we can find that information, how to move forward, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McQueen, Warden McQueen, isn't it just as, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but isn't it just as simple as let the numbers dictate where the priorities are?
I would think to a certain degree it would. That's why we have stats, right? Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Councillor Soever.
Yes, and that's a good segue into what I was just going to say. Was certainly the numbers we're looking at below 30% of the person's income, and it was identified that it's the 30,000 level, which would mean that your rents would have to be, well, total housing cost of $750 with rents somewhere between $450 and $500. But there's a great disparity across the county in what the average rent is now. I know we're going to look at some older statistics in the next little while, but newer statistics would indicate, for instance, in Collingwood, which is not in our county, but is more similar to this edge of the county, you're looking at about $1,000 a month. Whereas over in West Grey, you're looking at $650. Meaford, you're looking at about $750, and Owen Sound, you're looking at about $850. So there's a big range of numbers there, from $650 in West Grey, which is an average rent. So therefore, you add to that the utilities, and you're still to get to that 30% of your income, that implies that you're going to need an income of 40,000. So when you're looking at 30,000, you really are looking quite a bit below that. Whereas if you're looking at more of the Collingwood type, $1,000 a month rents for a 1-bedroom apartment, you're looking at 52,000 is 30% of, if you're going to say that your housing has to be no more than 30%. So you're looking at a big range there. And certainly I think, we've got to look at that, because it is a huge range. It's, one part of the county, the rents are 50% higher than in the other. So
there may also be the opportunity to get buy-in from lower tiers, from private developers. So in other words, in assessing where are we going to, quote, build, we might be assessing, number one, need, but number two, maybe the local municipality, a lower tier, is offering up some land, and maybe there is a local person who's saying, hey, I'm going to be in on this to whatever, 10% or 15%. And so that one might be more of a priority, because you say, Jesus, we can, it's a high priority, and it seems to be more sort of shovel ready.
yeah.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Have we covered off enough the South Georgian Bay, which seems to be looking more at the attainable housing and the incentives that can be offered for that. So I'm getting the sense that attainable housing is more incentive, and I'm hearing from the group that affordable housing is what we want to prioritize, and that's more on the ownership side, right? We're looking to have it controlled by us. I see some nods. Can I move on to item number 5, the municipal data sets?
I think, Mr. Chair, it really shows that there's a lot of similarities between attainable and affordable, and it just depends who the author or the reader are and how you interpretate those things, because it does have some interpretations in this report that sort of talks about that, and then it sort of separates it out. And it's a big item that we're tackling here, and we're up for the challenge, that's for sure. And it's good stuff that we're doing. So we'll move on.
So Randy, we'll turn to you next for the statistical data.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Hicks. So this is some additional data that we presented at the last task force meeting. And based on that discussion, the task force recommended that we look at some further comparisons be made with Simcoe County, as some of the municipalities adjacent to Simcoe, such as the Blue Mountains and Grey Highlands, may show a better comparison with what is happening in Simcoe versus, say, comparing with, say, what's happening in Bruce County or the remainder of the province. So based on that, the task force also asked if there was data available for each of the local municipalities in Grey County to try to get a better sense of the various housing needs within each local municipality. Based on the task force recommendations, additional information has been gathered, and we're still gathering information as we speak. Councillor Sawyer just pointed to, some further information that we can pull out from CMHC, looking at specifically, some Collingwood specific data. So we can look into that for sure. So this first link on the agenda shows some of the new slides that have been generated. And the second link on the agenda basically combines the new slides with the previous slides presented to the task force all under one document. So I'll just go through and highlight some of the new slides that have been generated by Brad Noble, our planning data analysis coordinator. So this first slide basically shows the average market rent, and the previous data presented to the task force provided a comparison compared to Grey County, the province, and Bruce County. And so this here shows you a comparison between Grey and Simcoe. And as you can see, the increase to average market rent has gone up in Grey County, as well as Simcoe County over the past few years, which is consistent with the province and Bruce County as well. For Simcoe County, the average market rent has increased at a higher rate compared to Grey County. So for the Blue Mountains and parts of Grey Highlands that are close to Simcoe County, the increase in average market rate is likely more consistent with the rates in Simcoe County, i.e. they are increasing at a higher rate than other parts of Grey County. We know that the average market rent has continued to increase past 2017. Councillor Swever indicated some information that he described based on Collingwood stats that CMHC provides up to October 2019. And so we know the average market rent has continued to increase, even outside of these numbers that are shown here on the slide. Next slide shows the average and medium dwelling value. Again, it's from 2013 to 2017 and compares this to Simcoe County. So similar to what was presented in comparison to Bruce County at the last meeting. Again, the trend that the average and median dwelling values have continued to increase over that time frame. And again, if we had data beyond 2017, it would show this trend continuing to increase. And that's just based on what we've seen from local real estate associations. In Simcoe, you can see the average value of dwellings increasing at a much higher rate, which is consistent with what we're seeing in the town of the mountains and parts of Grey Highlands. This next slide shows residential building permits issued in 2018 and 2019 in each municipality in Grey County, and it shows the types of residential dwellings as well. And as you can see, Blue Mountains has the highest number of residential building permits in both 2018 and 2019. And you can also see the trend of more multi-unit residential dwellings being built, with more apartment condos and row houses showing up in the data, especially in the 2019 graph on the right-hand side. Owen Sound is showing the highest number of apartment condo permits being issued in 2019. And this is a good stat to see, as there's, as we've talked about, a need for more rental apartments throughout the county. And we're starting to see that trend already happening in the marketplace, which is fantastic news. The task force may recall at the last meeting, we presented some data from CMHC regarding core housing need that is only available, unfortunately, for certain municipalities in Grey County. Last time we presented data for the city of Owen Sound, and this time we've added core housing need data for the municipality of West Grey and compared this with the core housing need in Owen Sound to see if there are any differences being shown in the data. So as a refresher, CMHC defines core housing need as households falling below at least one of the adequacy, affordability, or suitability standards, and it would have to spend 30% or more of its total before tax income to pay for the housing. So again, that's consistent with what we've been talking about earlier, is that 30% or less being in hopefully that affordable range for folks. So this slide here shows the average income and the average shelter costs for those in core housing need in Owen Sound and West Grey. So as you can see, the average income in core housing need is slightly higher in Owen Sound for owners and renters as it is for West Grey owners and renters. And that's on the graph on the left-hand side here. The graph on the right shows average shelter costs for those in core housing need. And again, the average shelter cost for those in core housing need in Owen Sound is slightly higher than the cost in West Grey. This next slide shows the age of maintainer in core housing need. And a household maintainer is the person residing in the household that's responsible for paying rent or the mortgage. In Owen Sound, the majority of those in core housing need are in need of rentals versus home ownership. Excuse me. Where in West Grey, the need is more even, excuse me, with both rentals and home ownership. In terms of age of maintainer core housing need, in Owen Sound, the core housing need for age groups between 25 to 64 years age are generally higher than in West Grey. And in both Owen Sound and West Grey, the age of the residents in core housing need increases with age, meaning that the majority of residents in core housing need are 55 years of age or older. But as you can also see, there's also still a need for core housing in younger age groups as well. So this highlights the importance of making sure that the affordable housing builds provide a mix of housing options, single bedroom apartments, as well as multiple bedroom apartments, both to help with, in some cases, the senior core housing need that's being shown here, as well as making sure that we have units for families as well. So this next slide shows the types of households that are required for the residents that are in core housing need in both Owen Sound and West Grey. The highest household type needed are one-person households, with the higher need being female one-person households. And you'll recall that that was kind of the key target group that was coming out of the Owen Sound data that we presented at the last task force. As you can see, though, there's also a high need for male one-person households, as well as households for seniors, both male and female. Again, we can't lose sight of the fact that there's also a need for housing for families as well. This next slide shows the activity limitations of residents that are in core housing need. And as you can see, approximately 1,400 households in Owen Sound that are in core housing need have at least one person with activity limitations, and 260 households in West Grey. And this points to the importance of providing accessible affordable housing in order to meet the needs of residents with activity limitations. We anticipate that this need will increase as the average age of our overall population continues to age over the next 20+ years. This next slide shows the number of households that have seniors present in core housing need. So in Owen Sound, there are over 650 households in core housing need with at least one person over the age of 65. And in West Grey, approximately 100 households. For households in core housing need that have residents under the age of 65, Owen Sound has 1,200 households and West Grey just under 250. This next slide shows the number of households that have at least one minor residing in the household that is in core housing need. So a minor being someone under the age of 18. In Owen Sound, there are just over 300 households in core housing need that have at least one minor residing in the household, and approximately 40 households in West Grey. This is the housing wait list for Grey County Housing. And this also identifies the type of housing that's required as per the wait list. The numbers are slightly skewed as some people put their name on the list for multiple communities. But what you can see here is that the majority of the people on the wait list have requested to live in Owen Sound and Hanover. and Hanover's being the next highest, with Meaford and Durham shortly, following. Half of the housing that's being requested is for singles, and then the other half is an equal percentage between family and seniors. And again, we may see the senior housing waitlist continue to increase as our population continues to increase in age.
Randy, please help me again with the term core housing need.
Yeah, the core housing need, it's defined by Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. These are households that fall below at least one of the adequacy, affordability, or suitability standards, and would have to spend 30% or more of its total before tax income to pay for the housing.
Thank you.
Combination of things, but it's essentially ties back to that spending 30% or more. Yeah.
So Mr. Chair, just before Randy goes ahead,
Go ahead.
does this go back to what Councillor O'Leary was sort of saying, where would we build it? But you can see where more demand is in your two larger centers, correct?
Yeah, based on a lot of the information that we've seen, it definitely points to there's still a high wait list and high demand, no doubt in Owen Sound and Hanover. And this is more again on the affordable side. And as you can see, Meaford and Durham are also on that list. It's very comparable to Hanover. But yeah, you're correct, Mr. Warden. The Owen Sound is definitely the highest in terms of need based on the wait list. But looking at some of the other data and information, no doubt the need is across the board. It just, the need varies, across the county for sure.
So just through you, Mr. Chair, is there a way to take that particular stat and break it down even further? Because, that sort of goes back just a sense of where we need to start to look at sort of addressing this. And obviously there's more in those numbers than just in single family and seniors, but I just wondered if at a certain time we could break into that a little bit more, break that down. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Randy?
and if I could, Mr. Chair, that's part of the next steps is to, Anne-Marie mentioned that we're meeting with local municipal planners to look at some of this data and information, as well as look at that, the land mapping. I don't know if you remember the publicly owned land that are either owned by the province or the county and municipalities, to see if any of those properties would be suitable for a potential build. And then look at this data, exploring the need for housing within each local municipality. And then we're hoping then from that, we bring back further information to this task force that would present the results of some of those discussions with local municipal planners. So we're meeting with them in mid-October. So we hope to have some further results following that meeting.
Councillor Burley, I see your hand. I'm coming next to you. But it just strikes me because I sit on the SWIFT board, and it's interesting because they have developed at SWIFT a bit of an algorithm around where are we going to put, where is the need and how much money do we have and how do we, work with these limited dollars and get the projects in the right places where the need is greatest, or in accordance with criteria that we develop. So one area might say, we want to get as many houses as possible, and other areas might say we want to get to those really hard to reach places. And of course, you're not going to reach many of them. They're separated quite apart. But we might be able to learn from a place like SWIFT how we develop this, I guess, algorithm. I'm not using the right word perhaps, but how we develop this process for deciding, looking at the data and saying, here's the need and here's the money and here's where the priorities ought to be. Councillor Burley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those figures could be completely different. We're basing it on the needs like Owen Sound and Hanover and so on. But if the option was that, for instance, Georgian Bluffs or Meaford or Chatsworth had the availability of more affordable housing, would that not just swing those numbers right completely around?
Randy?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Councillor Burley?
I'm just thinking, like, say, for instance, say George and Bus built a multi-complex affordable housing. And the need for Moan Sound would kind of shift and go, they would sort of go towards where the beehive is, in other words, George and Bus, if they had that building. I'm not just saying George and Bus, I'm saying any lower tier. Instead of just thinking just in the urban settings all the time, we need to get our thought going to where it's feasible to make these available for everybody, and the need, according to your charts, could completely change, what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the core data is based on where people currently reside, right? So for the core housing need, in terms of they're living in those communities, yeah, I guess they could relocate to other communities, and the core housing need may stay with those folks that are meeting that criteria. So I guess it could be, but based on the current, where the people that are currently residing in communities, this is the current statistics of what it's showing for core housing need. Unfortunately, we don't have the same information for every local municipality. If we had it, it would show that there's still core housing need across the county. It would vary, obviously, in terms of numbers. With Owen Sound likely being the highest, and that's where we're trying to use other stats like the housing wait list and other things to try to inform, okay, where is the greatest need? Because it is a combination of things that we think that will ultimately add to or validate where the need is the most.
Councillor Soever, I'm coming to you next, but just before I get to you, Councillor Burley, I guess we might look at the long-term care experience for sort of addressing your point. So if we build a brand new facility in Durham, what does that do to the wait list for the other places? Because maybe now Durham is the more desirable place because people would perceive that the beds are newer, they're more modern, maybe more comfortable. And so maybe that skews the wait list to a certain extent. You're saying the same thing could happen in housing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But see, what I'm saying is I'm looking more on the affordability side too. It may be more convenient and cheaper to put affordable housing in not an urban setting, more a rural setting. I know there's other things go with the transportation, all that stuff, but it may be a thing to look at, change our way of thinking to, let's put the people, we can shift them wherever we need to be, where we have affordable housing. That's all.
Yeah, but it's probably a little bit more complicated than that. And I know, Councillor Soever, you're waiting patiently. But I think part of why we see the stats playing out the way they do is that people want to be sort of in those primary settlement areas where there are other types of services, doctors, and perhaps I don't have to walk to work. And, so those may be driving those numbers to a certain extent. Councillor Soever, you're next.
Yes, and when we look at core housing needs and looking at the 30% model, given that if you have a rent of about $1,000 a month and then you have your utilities and everything, then what you're really defining is that anybody who doesn't have a job that provides with a gross income of $52,000 a year is in need if they can't find a place under $1,000 a month. So then you have the people that are already living here, but then as pointed out by that South Georgian Bay housing survey, which was done, there are so many jobs that are unfilled currently because people can't afford to live here. So the question is, you've got the people in terms of what is the total need in a community. You have the need of the people that are already living here, and then you have the need of all the businesses that can't find people, and that would include the new long-term care facility, because when you're looking at if rents are 1,000 because there is no housing below that rent level, then you're really having to say, okay, you either got to pay the long-term care worker more than $52,000 a year, which would be great. I would prefer that, but since that doesn't happen all the time, for the janitorial staff, the kitchen staff, whatever. You've got the unfilled need of the people that you actually need to provide you with your services that might work in your supermarkets, your doctor's offices, but they're not here. And we've seen that here, especially with COVID, where the supermarket couldn't have stayed open with people unless the Rotary stepped up and started cleaning the carts and helping out with food deliveries and everything else, so that the limited staff that they had couldn't, deal with the increased demand and procedures that had to be put in place. So, there's not only the need of the people that live here, but the people that we need to live here but aren't living here yet.
Okay, Randy, should we turn back to you? Are you finished with this data set? And did you want to turn to the updated housing?
I am, yep. And if there's no more questions, specifically at this time with respect to that, there was a presentation that we'd hoped to link to the agenda, but we missed adding it. And so I apologize for that. And this is a data that was presented to the Hanover and Owen Sound Task Force. Sorry, they're starting to blend together in my mind.
Yeah, mine too.
And really, this goes back to the Affordable Housing Task Force asking if there is any data where we can start looking at each local municipality and trying to, again, assess the needs of those local municipalities. So we'll share these links with this task force. I thought while we're here as a group, if you don't mind, I might take just a few minutes just to highlight some key ones out of that particular slide deck. So just share my screen. So this is what we're calling the combined municipal profiles, and I'll share another link, and we're not going to go through that today, but we've also broken it out into individual municipalities, showing demographic information, housing information specifically for each of the 9 municipalities. This particular slide deck compares each municipality and looks at demographic data and housing data for each of the 9 municipalities. So I'll just quickly go through this. This is the first slide. I'll try to highlight some of these trends in some of the slides, so I won't spend any time on that. And again, hopefully you can go through this once we share this presentation with everyone.
Okay.
The slide shows population and households. This shows permanent population and households as projected by Environics data for each local municipality to what they think it is currently today. So Owen Sound, as you can see, has the highest permanent population as well as the highest permanent households, being twice as much as the second highest municipality. This is the age of household maintainer. And again, the household maintainer being the person that pays the mortgage or the rent. It shows it by percent of the overall permanent population. And then there are younger residents residing in Owen Sound and Hanover generally, and people within the 45 to 74 year age range are living in higher percentages than other municipalities like Blue Mountains, Southgate, and Georgian Bluffs. I'm going to skip through some of these slides just to, for time perspective, and just touch on the key housing ones. So this is households with children at home. And as you can see, this shows the overall percentage of households that have children residing in the household. And as you can see here, Southgate has the highest percent of households with children at home, being just 4%. And the Blue Mountains has the lowest at just over 25%. This next slide shows age of children at home. And this shows the age of children at home and breaks it down by the percentage of household population by age groups of children. So you can see here again, just how you can see the percentage of people in different age groups based on children living at home. This particular slide shows the household size for each local municipality in Grey County. And out of this, Owen Sound and Hanover has the largest portion of 1-person households, being 37% and 34% respectively, while Southgate has the largest portion of 5+ person households, which is just over 12%. This is housing tenure. So this is in terms of percent of households that own versus rent. And Owen Sound and Hanover has the highest portion of renters in Grey County at 43 and 39% respectively, and therefore the lowest percent of households that are owned compared to other municipalities. Georgian Bluffs has the lowest portion of renters at 8% and the highest portion of home ownership, which is at 92%. This shows housing type by either family households and non-family households. And Hanover and Owen Sound has the lowest total family households on a percent of household basis compared to others. And Georgian Bluffs, Chatsworth, and Southgate have a higher overall percentage of family households. This slide shows further detail regarding family households and non-family households. And Hanover and Owen Sound has the highest percent of one-person households, as I mentioned. And it's about even for 2 or more person households and multifamily households across the board. This shows the age of housing construction. So this shows that Owen Sound has the oldest housing stock with 40% of all homes constructed before 1961. And then Owen Sound, Hanover, and Georgian Bluffs have the highest percent of housing stock built between 1961 and 1980. And then between 2001 to 2016, the town of Blue Mountains had the highest percent of households constructed in this period compared to others. And then after 2016, it's showing Georgian Bluffs and Meaford are showing a higher percent of households constructed compared to others. We know that from building permit activity, as I showed in the previous presentation, that the building activity has been fairly strong throughout most of Grey County. And we know that there's obviously a lot of housing that's being built in Blue Mountains, Owen Sound, and Meaford, that last one was showing. This is households by dwelling type. And in Hanover and Owen Sound, the lowest percent of housing stock are single attached houses as houses compared to others, and the highest apartment percent household totals in comparison to others. This breaks it down further by the types of houses and apartments, with again, Owen Sound and Hanover having a lower percent of their housing types being single attached homes, but a higher percent housing type when it comes to row housing, semis, and apartments. This slide here shows the average household income for each local municipality. You can see the town of Blue Mountains is just under 144,000 average income, and the lowest in Owen Sound and Hanover around 77,000. And I'm just going to skip through here, this one here. So this is labor force by occupation. And we presented this at the Hanover and Owen Sound Task Force, and there was a question about, is this represent the occupations for the people residing in those communities or actual occupations in those communities? We're still digging into the data to see what actually it is, and we'll look at that in further detail. But what this data is showing, that there's the highest percent population in Hanover and Owen Sound for sale and service occupations. Blue Mountains has the highest in management and business, finance, administration, as well as arts, culture, recreation, and sport. Owen Sound has the highest percent in education, government, religion, and social occupations. And Southgate and West Grey have the highest percent of their population in trades and transport occupations, as well as manufacturing and utilities. Georgian Bluffs and Owen Sound have the highest percent population in health occupations, and Southgate has the highest percent in natural resources and agriculture sector. So again, we apologize for not linking this information to the agenda, but we'll sure to share this with the task force, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that come out of that once we share that with the task force, or anything that I presented here at the moment.
Are there any questions right now? I don't see any. We're going to move on. Are we on to item number 6 now?
Yeah, so this, I'll start off and then Savannah's gonna tackle the second document. So Savannah mentioned this, I think, before. We're trying to generate infographics that just show what it could look like if we start stacking some of these incentives that we've been talking about. Things like if we provide the land or if we exempt development charges. Well, what does that actually look like when it comes to a build? So we used some of the information from the Odawa Heights build, which is actually later on in the agenda. And based on that, so this location, as an example, is in Owen Sound. It's a purpose-built rental apartment. It's a 60-unit build. We just estimated the average square feet is about 750 square feet per unit. The construction cost for Odawa Heights is coming in at $237 a square foot. So we know that that's a fairly accurate square footage based on what we're seeing, at least in Owen Sound. The land cost for that particular property was purchased for $400,000 back in 2016. So again, we're using fairly recent information on that. Based on that, the total construction costs, and I recognize the overall build cost is, I think, less than around 13 million, I think, in Anne Marie's report. But the actual construction, just looking at the build, is about 10.665, assuming that, again, it's $237 a square foot, and their average is about 750 square feet of units. And so what we looked at here is then, okay, what if the city and the county were exempting development charges for rentals? So what would that account for in savings? And as you can see here, that would account for just under $556,000 in savings if development charges were exempted. The land, if the land were available and say donated or provided for this build, again, in this case, it was $400,000. So that equates to just under $1 million as potential savings to a builder if DCs were waived or land was donated, which adds up to be about 9% of the construction costs for a project. So this just, again, provides an example of how, when we start looking at some of these incentives, what it actually could mean on the ground and what it could mean in terms of potential savings for a build. And that could be the difference between whether an affordable build actually happens or doesn't. And so we just wanted to provide a bit of an infographic of what that could look like in potential savings based on what council's looking at as incentives.
Okay, and Savannah, you're going to cover.
Yes, and
community
the
improvement plan?
second, yes, the second attachment, we know the community improvement plan template is a large document, so we wanted to go through and pick out those incentives specifically earmarked for affordable housing and put them in one document so that you would have them. So just
Thank you.
basically exactly what Randy just went over with the last example, but if you start with surplus land and then you add the development charge on top of it, in some cases, that's going to be enough to help make this a good business case. But we also have the ability between our permit and application fee exemptions and the tax increment equivalent grant that there are two other incentives that could be added on to help over the long term to get rid of those upfront costs to the developer specifically. So we just wanted to make sure that you were aware of those 4 items in particular that did come out of the fall. Sorry, there you go. I should have done that. Sorry, Randy.
I forgot to share my screen earlier, so.
Yeah, because we know, and I mean, we've been talking this afternoon that we know the demand is very much there, but right now the business case just isn't. So if we're going to be looking to our private sector and our developers in particular, what can we do to help bolster that business case? That helps take that question out of whether or not this is a good thing and actually purpose build affordable housing. So those are the specific grants and incentives out of the community improvement plan that once adopted locally could be stacked together to set that business case. So we just wanted to make sure you had that information.
I needed to unmute. Councilors, were there any questions coming from those 2 sheets before us? No. Okay. Thank you. I think, again, we're looking at the incentives go to attainable, and this group seems to be mostly concerned about affordable. Thank you, Andy. So are we on to item 7? Kim, is that you?
No, if that's me or if that's Anne Marie.
I can start if you'd like, Kim.
Sure, that'd be great.
So I know we had talked at an earlier meeting about putting some money towards the 2021 budget for affordable housing. And how do we come up with that? One of the ideas that we thought is after we had our conversations with the municipalities and we've identified some land that we might be able to work out a deal with maybe, then we could have a better number for you as to what that might look like. That was just one suggestion, just is that it might be easier for taxpayers, for council to understand where and what that money would be going towards if we had some numbers as to being able to purchase some land.
The other model, Mr. Chair, that's been used in some other jurisdictions, similar to what we've been doing with asset management, where the municipality has identified a particular percentage or a percentage of growth, perhaps, that they want to see put towards these kinds of builds. So there are a few models out there. We've also in the past talked about a funding model that's really based on a per household or per capita kind of contribution. If there was, if every household in Grey County put in $2, I'm saying, what kind of nest egg, if I can call it that, would that give us to be able to work towards this? But if there was an idea of what kind of money council felt was appropriate to put towards that, then we can look at ways to achieve that goal and make sure that it's reflected in the budget.
Councillor Silver, I just know that you'll have thoughts about this.
You're on mute.
Yeah, well, I think that's something we need to figure out. I mean, I'm all in favor of putting money in, but when you're looking at, the cost of $237 a square foot, that works out to about $177,000 a unit. Interest on that 2.5% is $370 a month. To pay off the principal over 25 years is another $600 a month almost. So the total of that, I just didn't have that total yet, equals this plus that. That's about $962 a month is what it would cost to pay that off over 25 years. Not to mention the operating. So if the rent just covered the capital, that'd be $962. If we're targeting somebody with an income of $30,000, they can afford about half of that, maybe. So the county will have to subsidize that unit to the tune of about $500 a month for just to pay off the capital. And that's something you just did quickly, but it's in that order of magnitude. So that's $500 a month
Per unit.
that we're in for each unit to pay off the capital and with the cost of money. So, this is the same struggle we're having in the town of Blue Mountains, even with Attainable. So it will be a considerable cost. It's something that we need to address though. And, but that's why I think early on, we've got to come up with that and say, okay, what are we going to achieve and how much will it cost?
But are we not looking at, I see you, Councillor O'Leary, I'll come to you next. Are we not looking at saying, here's the money that we could potentially set aside and how could we leverage those dollars so that there are other partners? Maybe there are private partners, people who are just interested in seeing affordable housing get developed. Maybe the other levels of government, including the lower tiers, are willing to come in as well. Actually, under this model here, we did have the what if, no, sorry. The 400,000 was just the what if the land were donated. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
looking at the Adawa. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple things. I think the most important people in this meeting right now is staff. Anne Marie is in this waist deep every day. Randy is up to date on everything. Kevin has the numbers. Kim is overseeing it. Why can't staff just put together and say, this is what we really need, council? And in a perfect world, this is what we have to have. And this is what it's going to cost. And pardon the language, but we need to shit or get off the pot and do something about affordable housing. Like, it just has to be done. So if you scare everybody to death, then we can start to scale it back maybe. But the only thing I'm worried about here in terms of numbers is I'm worried about that number of $237 a square foot. To me, I think that's low. I think it's closer to 300 from what I've seen, but I hope that that number is accurate.
Councillor Burley, what are your thoughts on that number? Oh, I just lost you. Here you are.
Here, I agree 100% with Larry. Brian, it's way too low. I think you're going to see it hitting over the 300, 305s where I think it's going to hit.
If I may, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see my hand up here, but
No.
that is the actual number that it did come in at for Ottawa Heights. So that is the number from the developer for this build. And yes, the way things are going, it could rise, but that is the actual number that the developer gave them.
Okay, so Kim, how do you respond to Councillor O'Leary saying, look, you know, the expertise is really with the staff, and could you guys come back with some sort of a, you know, you're the experts, could you come back to us with some sort of recommendation?
I think if this committee, if you have a sense of what the need is, or what the most critical need is, and you know, whether it's just Owen Sound and Hanover, or whether or not we want to go and look at several communities. But I think we need to set a goal based on the need. And if what we hear is that this is that population that is critical, then we can use that to try and build a plan to deal with those folks both in the short term and potentially in the longer term as well. But, you know, where it's so significant how much need there is for housing, that I think we're going to have to make some trade-offs. There won't be one solution that works well in each community. I think some places maybe have some assets that could be repurposed. And that's another model that we haven't talked too much about here. We're talking about brand new builds rather than any kind of retrofitting. But maybe that's another place to look at things. But if you can tell us what you want to see, if you wanted to see, you know, 50 units a year around the county, or 100, or whatever the number is, sorry, Anne Marie, I didn't mean to give you a heart attack there, then we can work towards that goal, or give you a model that talks about, okay, if that's the goal that you have, these are the ways that we can make this into a reality, and this is likely the kind of investment that it's going to take.
So Kim, I'm going to count on the other councillors to nod their heads if they agree. I think what we're hearing in terms of consensus is that we want to focus on affordable housing. Secondly, I'm hearing that we're getting some very good data, and we might want to let that data dictate the priorities. And thirdly, we then have to look at what can we do, what's realistic, and let the data dictate where we're going to move first. And staff could probably take their lead from the data and say, well, based on the data that we presented to you, this is what we're seeing. And if we agree that the data is accurate, this is what we're recommending. And that could be a start. We're not going to solve, the entire affordable housing problem in one shot, but at least we're doing two things, in my view. One is we're understanding the issue much better because the data is speaking to us. And number two, we're at least moving in the right direction. So we're creating a trajectory with a start and a recommendation coming from this group about what that start ought to be with a budget attached to it. Warden McQueen, I see your hand first, and then Councillor O'Leary, I see yours.
So the past, was being on county council for a number of years. What I've seen is more of addressing it in a sense. So what's a 0.5% of our budget? And are we able to put, say, 0.5% of our budget toward social housing? So basically, it's sort of like little sound bites. So you sort of say, and this was sort of something when we talked about asset management and putting money aside for reserves for roads and bridges and all that kind of sense. So, and I think also in the healthcare funding within our county as well, we've generally have taken so much, or we have in the past, where we take so much out of our general budget and goes into a reserve. So basically, it's not like it's sort of a commitment, which could come back to our strat plan meeting in October. So basically, I don't know what 1/4 or 0.5% of our general budget of 55 million, what that equals from when we go to our tax base. But say we were generating X number of dollars from whatever that is. So it's sort of a commitment to social housing, so that you sort of get past that. So you're not coming back all the time and, okay, we need so much for this project. So it goes into a bit of a reserve. And then from that reserve, then you develop the model that, and I think Anne-Marie's talked about, you want to go to each municipality and you come up with a formula. And part of that formula is well, and that whole plan would still come back to county council for approval. But then you start to develop that plan. So, okay, we have a development in municipality X, and municipality X is providing or can provide the land. And then also we can get funding from the province, and we can also get, here's some private funding, and each project sort of comes back with its own project, right? And then it has all the different intricacies of how it moves forward, and it sort of has the how it's going to move forward, and this is all the intricacies that make it happen. So that way, then it's sort of, and then from that, it pulls from that reserve that's already built. So then you're not getting into this part of well, we got this particular project, but it's hinging on the budget. But if they happen to be a year, well, no, we can't support it because we've got to cut this because of this and because of that. But if you have this reserve, then it's sort of that separate pot that then it still has to get approval by council. But then it starts to build that affordable housing pot. And then when you come back with your plan to county council, well, municipality X is doing this, right? It builds it on each project itself, and then you sort of start to get those. You start to put things together. Like, again, coming back to that Odawa, I keep trying to say it right, but I mean that's a model that seems to be working. And 237, if that's the final build on that, that's fantastic in this day and age. So, but you know what I'm saying, Mr. Ward or Mr. Deputy Warden, you sort of make that commitment first, and then you come back. But still, the project still got to come back, and it goes into that reserve. But I just, in the past, that seems to be how we have able to do things in the county. And I think about healthcare, and I think about asset management, and all different things like that. You just sort of do that little soundbite as a commitment. Just a thought.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you. I think I just get the sense that we're all struggling to find a starting point here. I think the message is pretty clear that we all want to do something, and it needs to be significant. But I think in terms of any recommendation that comes back, Kevin has to give us a way to pay for it. That has to be part of the recommendation. Or he's going to come back and say, you know what, this is what you need to do, and you can't afford to do it. So, you know, you're going to have to, that's what it's going to come down to. But I think we all need to look ourselves in the mirror as counselors and say, you know what, we've got to have the courage to do whatever needs to be done here. And I think, you know, I'm sensing that commitment is there. We need staff to come back with that recommendation. It's going to hit us right smack in the forehead with what really needs to happen. And we'll take it from there. But part of that recommendation has to be Kevin showing us what we have to do in terms of paying for it.
So I agree with you, Councillor O'Leary. I think we've been hearing for a number of years now that affordable housing and transportation, you know, are priorities. And if they really are priorities, we have to put our money where our mouth is at some point. And
But what has council done? I mean, that's my point. This has been talked about for so many years. You know, Mr. Warden's talking about, you know, the past few years on council. But what did you accomplish? Like, nothing has been done. We all talk about it, but we haven't stepped up to the plate. I think it's time to do that.
thank you. Are we getting, sorry, Councillor Soever?
Yes, you know, when I'm looking at these capital numbers per unit, it works out to, we're gonna have to subsidize about 6,000 per year. So 350 units would be 2.1 million. Now, I don't know, Anne Marie, maybe Anne Marie has a good idea of what it costs per unit in terms of operating cost. You know, and, you know, so I think we need to provide those kind of numbers to council, because I agree with Mr. O'Leary that we need to go to council and say, look, this is the order of magnitude number, and are we serious about this or are we not? And, you know, really hold people's feet to the fire and say, let's go ahead. Let's get a multi-year commitment for whatever amount we choose. Because, you know, we don't have to choose 350. We can choose, if we go to 175, it'd be about $1 million a year in just, you know, the cost of money in construction per unit that we have to subsidize. That's assuming the person can pay $460 a month kind of thing, which is 30% at the $30,000 income level. So, you know, that's what we need from staff, is to give us that number, because we also, you know, we can say, this is, okay, given that number, this is what we can accomplish. And is it enough? And if they say, no, that's not enough, then you say, well, give us more money and we can accomplish so much more. And because this is what's happened here in the town of Blue Mountains for many years. They established the Blue Mountain Attainable Housing Corporation many years ago. And till the last year, nobody wanted to even hire somebody to run it. And so they tried to run these two programs, but I think it generated less than 10 units over the last 6 years. So, I mean, because it was all done and the people worked hard, but you can't get anything done with no money and, you know, a volunteer board. So it's going to cost money to get it going. And, you know, we've bitten the bullet here, and we appreciate, you know, the county sending us back our supplementary, which, you know, we generated here. But, you know, I think we're moving forward, and we'll have shovels in the ground soon. And at some point, we've got to go through the public consultation and all that, because that's the next step. When you tell somebody you're going to put it there, then you get all kinds of people saying, well, those people, do we want those people? And it's very unfortunate, but, you know, so there's going to be some tough sledding ahead, and it takes political will. And so I think we've got to paint council as a whole into a corner and say, look, we're going ahead, and that's the will, and full speed ahead. And if people, well, you got to go through the consultation, but, you know, I'm sure that once you identify a site, then, well, here people said, well, why don't we just give them bus service and bring them in from Owen Sound? all our employees, which, you know, they, you know, even though attainable housing was, you know, everybody said we needed it in the last election, but when you identify a site, then everybody figures out that maybe, you know, somewhere else that those people should live. And, you know, it's very offensive, but, you know, so we're going to have some tough conversations, and I'm sure I won't be that popular when I go after some of these people.
Thank you, Councillor Soever. I saw Anne Marie with her hand and in her trusty
Thank you.
card.
Thank you. Yes, so I would be thrilled about bringing back some ideas and some costs as to what it would look like for our wait list. And certainly there's options, right? I did mention a rent supplement. So that probably might be another option we can include. It doesn't have to be brand new builds. And I think there's opportunity out there. I have a nonprofit with land that wants to build. Just maybe needs a little bit of incentive and some funds and some help to do that. So I think if we were to look at some of the options that we have available to us over the next couple of years, and then put money to it, and come back to council and say, here's what it would cost to do X number, and then we can break it down. So I would be happy to work with Kevin and bring something forward.
Okay, that's really good, because when Councillor O'Leary said we want to get something done, I saw just about every head nodding,
Yes.
including Heather in a way.
Yes, because Anne Marie actually took the words out of my mouth. It was, I'm going to recommend that we maybe put a recommendation on the floor that staff bring back a report on critical housing needs, key assets and opportunities, that this then can narrow the scope down for this task force. And that information can then be provided to you to make a recommendation to council on inclusion for some funding in the 2021 budget.
Happy to
Heather, I
move
love
that.
what you just said. You had a way with words there. That's what you do though,
It's
right?
what clerks do. I don't,
So what she just said.
Tara and I will work it out, but yeah.
Okay, but you want to get a motion on the floor. Perhaps we can
Yes,
do that.
please.
And then I see Councillor Burley and Councillor O'Leary with their hands up. But can we get a motion going first? So we're not meeting all day long. So if you could repeat, Madam Clerk,
do
a
my
recommendation to council
That
from council.
that staff bring a report back on the critical housing needs, key assets and opportunities for the Affordable Housing Task Force to consider for the 2021 budget.
And we might wordsmith that a bit more.
We might, absolutely.
Okay, and so Councillor O'Leary, are you moving that?
Happy to move that.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Councillor Burley. Okay, discussion. Do I just call the vote or is there discussion? Then I'm going to call the vote. All those, anybody opposed, actually put your hand up. No one is opposed, so I'm going to say that was unanimously approved. Now, hands were up, Councillor O'Leary and Burley. Which one of you wants to go? You're good, Councillor Burley and Councillor O'Leary, are you okay?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Excellent. Randy.
Sorry, if I could, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to highlight there were some recent changes in the Development Charges Act that allow municipalities as an eligible service to look at housing. So just wanted to point that out, that as part of the Development Charges Review, which will be happening in 2021, there may be an opportunity there as well to look at potential revenue to add to the reserve that Councillor Burley was talking about as funds that we could use to fund future affordable housing builds. So I just wanted to plant that seed as well, as it's something that we're going to be investigating, and maybe it's something that we highlighted in the staff report as well.
Very good. Thank you, Randy. I don't see any other hands, so maybe that's a good sign for us to move along. Are we on number 8? There's going to be, we had some discussion about this already. Is that you, Kim? Or Randy?
No, it's me, and I think we've covered this off. It went through several discussions earlier in terms of we're meeting local planners to sort out some of this this further information. So yeah, I think we're
covered. Number 9, is that you again, Randy?
Sorry, Scott's going to take this. Sure.
Scott, how are you?
Good. Thanks, Chair Hicks and members of the committee. So I won't spend too long on this because we actually have a report coming to Committee of Whole on Thursday on this. But this is a good news story, if you will. County Planning and Economic Development staff have partnered with students from the University of Toronto to look at the housing opportunities that exist within our downtowns. So we're looking at a few different things here. One is we're looking at the current policy options and current policies available on our main streets in our downtowns, where we are trying to maintain a healthy mix of obviously commercial and recreational opportunities, as well as, you know, the traditional apartments above the shops, if you will. And then we also want to look at what are some of the barriers that are out there right now. So what are the costs? What are the incentives available? And what's in some cases restricting redevelopment of some of these vacant spaces in our downtowns. So we've partnered with these students, and they're going to look at one downtown in each of our 9 member municipalities to really dig down and see what's out there in terms of the planning policies, in terms of the zoning and the official plan. But like I said, in terms of those other barriers and incentives as well. So we've just met with the students for the first time last week. There's 5 students from Toronto that are eager to get going on this. We've sent an email out this morning to local municipal staff to start to get their ideas on who are some of the key contacts that the students should be in touch with, both from a municipal staff perspective, but also from the perspective of some of those building owners in your downtowns and the landlords in your downtowns, to really get that on the ground perspective of what the opportunity is. And it could be that those opportunities lead to the need for policy changes at the county or municipal level, or it could be that those opportunities also help inform some of the other discussions that we're talking about today. And certainly there might be a mixture of attainable and affordable housing opportunities. Granted, this task force is more geared towards the affordable situation, but we just wanted to make the committee aware of this, and certainly can answer any questions now, and we'll be having the discussion again at Committee of the Whole on Thursday.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions of Scott? Seeing none, we move forward. Number 10. Is that you, Anne Marie?
That is me. I just wanted to bring an update to the task force on the Ottawa Heights and where they're at. And just bringing forward that phase 3, they have been able to squeeze another unit. It was originally going to be 59 apartments, and now it is 60. They have site plan approval from the city of Owen Sound, and a building permit has been issued. They did go out for tender, and it is Allen Hastings Limited that was awarded the contract. They're hoping to get starting on the site this fall before some of the snow flies. And then I just gave an idea of what it is going to look like. It's going to be 32 1-bedroom units and 18 2-bedrooms. Of the 60 units, 9 are accessible, but all of the units are going to be built with the aging in place guidelines. So they will have grab bars and raised electrical outlets, and the doorways themselves will be wide enough for a wheelchair or a scooter. And they are building in-house a scooter and bicycle storage area. So I've also mentioned the rents, $635, that includes utilities. For a 1-bedroom, and a 2-bedroom would be $740, and then the attainable market would be $820 for a 1-bedroom and around $1,200 for the 2-bedroom. So I just wanted to bring a little update as to where they're at in the build.
It's excellent. Councillor Burley.
Anne Marie, have you by any chance figure out the square footage per unit on this building?
Yeah. Yes, so the square footage per unit is 620 for a 1-bedroom, and which is normal. That's what our units are. And I believe it is 850 for the 2-bedroom. I might be off on that one.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Anne Marie. That's very exciting.
It is good news.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, we have a recommendation in Anne Marie's report that we should move in and second.
Okay, and that is that the update report be received for information. Could I get a mover, please? Moved by Warden McQueen, seconded by Councillor Burley. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed? I see none, so that is carried. Thank you. All right, we're on to item 11, correspondence from the town of Collingwood, out of the cold.
And Mr. Chair, I'll start this off, and I think Anne Marie maybe also has some additional information. This is to do with correspondence that we received, excuse me, from Brian Saunderson, the mayor of the town of Collingwood, in August, and there just hasn't been a committee meeting to bring this to until now. What Mayor Saunderson had written to ask us about was whether or not the County of Grey would be willing to provide some support to them. They were looking at, in partnership with the 211 service, in looking at a feasibility study around enhancements to the Out of the Cold shelter program that currently operates in Collingwood. Right now, that shelter is essentially volunteer operated. They're seeing a significant amount of demand and concerned about the future of it, unless they can really get their head around what the model is and where they need, what this service actually needs to be run appropriately in the future. So they put together a plan to undertake this feasibility study at a cost of $18,750. Collingwood Council agreed to pay for 50% of it, and they were looking to Simcoe Grey and Town of the Blue Mountains to provide the other 50%. Now, I understand, Mayor Soever, that the Town of the Blue Mountains has provided some support to this, but the County of Simcoe has not. Is that your understanding? Oh, you're on mute.
You're still on mute, Councillor Soever.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes, I understand well, I know we did. We gave them a small amount. It was, I forget what it is, but I can let you know. And I'm not sure what's happened with the County of Simcoe.
No.
We did give them something.
Okay. Anne Marie, did you have any more information than that? I know that Simcoe County, they weren't approached about this initially, so the kind of the feasibility study piece was developed without their input at the beginning, but that may have changed. Do you have any more information, Anne Marie?
All that I have is that they were unaware, I think, of the study that was happening. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think they are supporting it. And they do have services that are for all of the county at the upper level too. So I think they're maybe feeling maybe a bit different towards this. I don't have any other information other than I don't think that they're supporting it.
Right. And do you have a strong, any kind of sense actually of the utilization of the Out of the Cold shelter by people who would maybe be going there from Grey County at all?
As far as I'm aware, there are no statistics that I'm aware of for that as to where people, whether they're from Grey County, Simcoe, Collingwood. I haven't heard any. I haven't received any. I did ask for a little bit more information, so I can certainly report back at that time if I get it.
Okay. So I think the question before us was whether or not you wanted to give this any additional consideration, whether you wanted to provide any support to this effort. Certainly 211 has always been a wonderful partner to the county. And so I think that was part of our consideration here. I can circulate the feasibility study, or perhaps we could bring this forward to council with a bit of a summary on what was in the feasibility study, if that would be helpful in making a decision in the future.
I suppose, Kim, what you're looking for is perhaps this group would be making a recommendation to council that we support this feasibility study in some.
Or if you wish it to proceed forward to council, the question, we can certainly do a short report and put the question on the table there.
Yes, I think at the very least it can proceed to council. I guess it's whether it's proceeding with the recommendation from this group or not, that it be
Right.
supported. Warden McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess it all goes to the benefit of Grey County and as a whole. Looking at the title, is it basically for Collingwood, Wasaga Beach, and Clearview? Is that? I'm looking at the other feasible study. There was another report there that was added. So out of what is the exact ask? They said 50% came from Collingwood. I'm not sure what Blue Mountains and what they asked for Simcoe County, but what is the ask to Grey County? And if Grey County is then adding to it, does that change the scope to include all of Grey County? I guess that's the question. What is the scope of that?
Warden McQueen, what I see on the last page is that the total cost is 18,750, of which Collingwood is going to contribute half, so 9,000 and change. And I think they're looking for these other places, Clearview and Wasaga Beach and Simcoe and Grey County, to be responsible for the other 9,000. So I guess the discussion is, are we inclined to want to support this and to make a recommendation that council considers some sort of level of support, or not? I saw a hand, but I can't remember whose it was. Councillor O'Leary.
I'm just not sure, Mr. Chair, how, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way, but I don't see why Blue Mountain would give money towards this just because they're a neighbor, and then Grey County as well. Like, Blue Mountain is Grey County. So that just confuses things as far as I'm concerned. Like, if we're going to give as a county, then it's too bad Blue Mountain says put money in as well.
Councillor Soever.
Yes, I can confirm now that the Blue Mountains did pass a resolution on August 10th to fund this to the tune of $31.25. And the reason that we decided to contribute to that is the homelessness issue, particularly in and around the village, and people who might, that whole Craigleith area, they would use, emergency housing. The closest would be in Collingwood. And if they are working, even part-time at the village and they need emergency housing or something, they would, be looking toward a place somewhere here. So rather than us having our own shelter for a very small number of people, it just makes sense for us to, work with our neighbors and contribute a little bit.
So here's a thought: even if the recommendation from this group was that we put in 1,000 or 1,500, I think it's, the money isn't going to break the bank, but it's the symbol of it is that we're all in this together. Certainly there would be people from Grey County going to Collingwood if they're homeless, and vice versa. But I think if we're all in this together, even a token amount like 1,000 or 1,500 would certainly be a sign that we're in this together, and perhaps it would be an incentive for Simcoe and Wasaga Beach and Clearview perhaps as well to, make up the difference. Councillor O'Leary.
So I would move that we make it 1,500, but I still, for what it's worth, I think that 1,500 should be added to the 3,100, and Grey County should be making that donation on behalf of Blue Mountain. But that's just me.
Okay, so we have a mover at 1,500. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Warden McQueen. Any discussion on the motion? Kim?
I would just add that, the purpose of the work is to produce a feasibility study about permanent homeless shelter services. And if this report is well done, if the analysis is thorough, there will be some value to us, some learning from the analysis that the consultants are undertaking.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. So on the motion that Grey County contribute $1,500 towards the feasibility study, any opposed? Seeing none, I will say that that's carried. So it's going to be a recommendation to county council, I suppose, from this group that that county council contribute $1,500. And then I guess council will have a little debate about it, right?
That's right. In the interim, Anne Marie will look for some additional information as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. Where are we now? Any other business? What is reference items? Number 13, what is that, Kim?
That is just a standing item on the agenda. There weren't any reference items, so there's nothing to discuss there.
Okay, and next meeting date?
So, Mr. Chair, we will work with staff and the task force members to schedule a meeting date that will bring that report forward on the critical needs, assets, funding, et cetera.
Very good. Okay, well, we've had a very good meeting. And I have to say, I'm finding some of these task forces, because when we were talking about Owen Sound and Town of Hanover, there was mention of there should be a flavor of green theme, and we were talking about housing, and then when we were talking about housing, we're also talking about Owen Sound and the Town of Hanover. There seems to be a bit of blending going on here, which is kind of interesting. Anyhow, we've talked enough for a day, have we? Anybody else have anything to say? Then Councillor Burley, would you do us the honors? Move that we adjourn, seconded by Councillor O'Leary. It's not debatable, so thank you all. And especially, again, to the staff. I can see you folks are just working your patooties off. And it's very much appreciated. You know, it's a lot of work going on at the county right now. I know I said that on Friday, but I have to repeat it again with these task forces and everything else going on with COVID and whatnot. You've got a lot on your plate, and you're rising to the occasion, because the materials coming forward are top notch. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care,
Thanks, everyone.
everyone.